Good day, folks, and welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. My name is Christine Wood, and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows program at QEM. And for more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together former federal scientists to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our HEROES fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. And the webinar recordings and slides will be available in the QEM Resource Hub. By attending this webinar, you will soon be added to the QEM network and granted access to the hub. And I'm happy to introduce our HEROES Fellows today. Dr. Gregory Davis was a particle physicist at the University of Rochester and Northwestern University, where he made a small contribution to the Higgs boson discovery and larger contributions to less famous research. He then came to DC as an American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellow, and after the fellowship, he served for 16 years at the Institute for Defense Analyses and did turns in a congressional commission and the Department of Commerce. Dr. Davis's analyses have contributed to governmental decisions, large and small. And Dr. Brad Lusk is a serial entrepreneur that has founded and served on the executive boards of multiple companies in the private and nonprofit sectors. Previously, he served as the principal investigator on a Phase 1 STTR project with the National Science Foundation, while serving as the CEO for a biotech firm called Prescient Technologies. He holds a PhD in biological design from Arizona State and has published several peer-reviewed articles on biotechnology, technology transfer, and equity in STEM. He's also served as a National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine Fellow at the Naval Research Lab, an American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellow at the United States Agency for International Development, and an Embassy Science Fellow with the U.S. Department of State. And so I'm so happy to turn the floor over to our presenters today.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Um, I guess I can kick it off. Greg, do you want me to kick it off?
Yeah, I thought so.
Cool. So before I kick it off, I'm going to say, so the name of what we're going to talk to you about today is how the White House report, Science, A New Golden Age impacts you and your institution. I'm curious, and y'all could just put it in the chat. How many of you have read this document? And then if you have read the document, uh, as we're going through, go ahead and put some comments or some feels or some ways that you thought about the document. And then maybe Greg and I can pick up some of those as we go through. Or even at the end, if we have an opportunity to talk about how y'all feel about some of the stuff that we're going to discuss here. We really just want to open it up and give you all the opportunity to give us some feedback and get an idea of how people are receiving this document. So go to the next page, please. Next slide. So briefly, I just want to give an overview of the document. It's about 100 pages. It consists of 5 chapters and 2 annexes. It has an intro section that gives a bullet paragraph or so overview of each of the chapters, and then it goes straight into the chapters. So it's not too long of a read. It is an interesting read. I would encourage you all to go and read it if you can. Okay, next slide. I also want to mention that there's 2 annexes in here. So the first annex is a fiscal year 2028 research and development memo. Greg and I are going to be talking a lot about that memo in particular because we think it has a lot of implications for what you might expect in the funding landscape starting in fiscal year 2028 for sure, and some in fiscal year 2027, but mainly fiscal year 2028. Things to consider as we're going through this. So Science: A New Golden Age, it's not a policy document. It's a report issued to the president to make suggestions on how to develop the United States' science and technology and research and development enterprises. The concepts discussed in the webinar are based on the expert interpretation of the document from Dr. Davis and me. We don't represent the federal government. We're not federal employees. The two of us even have different perspectives on parts of the document, right? So thank you, Richard. Richard has not read it yet. But yeah, so we'll do the best we can to give you an overview of it. Uh, and so just to reiterate, so we don't work for the federal government. We don't represent the federal government. This is just two of us giving our expert opinions on the document. And as I stated before, much of this is going to be around the MOU or the memo that is in Annex 1. So now I'm going to turn over to Greg. He's going to talk to you a little bit about the author of the document and then some of how the overall funding infrastructure of the United States works and why you should care about the Office of Management and Budget or OMB.
Okay, thank you, Brad. If you look here, you can see Michael Krastios is the only person whose name is on the document. So traditionally, we'd call him the author. Of course, it's a federal government document. It was probably written by several people, but he's the author. And so, who is he? He has two titles, which is common, by the way. This is not unusual for this administration. He is the science advisor to the president and the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And in that role, he is somewhat unusual. The science advisor to the president is a title that's been used since the Truman administration. There have been 24 of them. 22 of them had doctorates. Most of them were PhDs. There were some DPhils and so forth in there, but they were doctorates. 23 were in science or engineering. 14 were physicists. Michael Kratsios has only one degree, and it's a BA in political science. So that's really unusual. He does have some technology experience. He worked with Peter Thiel, so he has experience in tech and software and so forth. And that's his background. So where does this document come from? This is a abbreviated, if you will, but complete uh, um, organizational chart of the executive branch of the federal government. I can say it's complete because it has a few dots in here that cover an awful lot of stuff. But we have up here the President of the United States, and there are a whole bunch of agencies under him. And there's also this other thing here, the Executive Office of the President. And down here is the Office of Science and Technology Policy. The Executive Office of the President has a complete budget of about $1.5 billion per year. This is not most of the government. This helps the president do his job. A lot of that's done through coordination. So the Office of Science and Technology Policy is headed by an advisor. These are the people who work in the White House or the executive office buildings right next to the White House. And they're not the place where the money really comes from. That's the rest of the federal government, these big agencies down here. I list the first few in the order of their seniority. So the Department of Defense, which is the technical name of one of the departments of the government, the entire discretionary budget of the government is $1.5 trillion. And if you're going to be applying for money, you're probably going to be asking the Defense Department or the War Department, the Department of Energy, NIH, which is part of HHS, or the National Science Foundation, NSF, and there are many other agencies out here. That's where the money is. That's most of the government. So Kratsios is not the boss of any of these folks. He works for the president and provides advice, but and a lot of that, as I said, is through coordination. It's not directly running any one of these agencies. So another thing is just a brief story from my own history. When I first came to the government, I was working in the Pentagon, and the Quadrennial Defense Review, the QDR, was about to come out. And there was a lot of talk about this document. What is Don Rumsfeld going to say? And my boss, who was an SES, been around the government for a long time as a civil servant, he said, if you really want to know where the Defense Department's going, don't look at the QDR, look at the budget. So we should probably take a look at that. And here it is. This is analysis from the AAAS. So I cite my source here. This is looking at the research in the federal government. And you can see there are lots of negative numbers over here. But let's talk about what this means. 2026 actual. This is the amount of money that has been appropriated to the NIH for fiscal year 2026. So they started being able to spend that money in theory in October of 2026, but actually somewhat later, continuing resolutions and so forth. But that's the total amount that they can spend between October of 2025 and the end of September of 2026. And then we'll enter the new fiscal year, 2027, which will have a different number, presumably. This column here is what the president has proposed that new number should be. So NIH's cut should be 13%. National Science Foundation, less than half. The only organizations on here that have growth listed, there is DOE's hydrocarbon and geothermal energy, formerly fossil energy. That has a small increase. NASA has a huge cut, but it has a growth within exploration, which means the cuts everywhere else are even bigger because exploration is really large. And the Defense Department, science and technology is going up as well. But everything else is listed as going down. So it is an interesting place to be where they talk about how they want to start a new golden age and yet they want to take funding away. Now, I also would say these numbers are not final. This is the president's proposal. The Congress is going to do what it wants to do. It will ultimately probably pass appropriations bills with new numbers in them, and then the president will probably sign it. It's possible that the president could veto an appropriations bill, but that's very rare. Last year, if you looked at the 2026 budget proposal, most of these numbers were a lot smaller, maybe not the DoD, and Congress bumped them all back up. And they're not exactly where they used to be, but they're roughly on par with where they've been for several years. There has been no change like this, and it's unclear that there will be this year, but we don't know. Congress is not yet acted. And this chart shows what the implementation timeline typically looks like. Brad, did you want to present this?
Sure, I could talk about it. Yeah, this is just kind of giving you an overview of the timeline for the budget appropriations process. And so just to relate it back to the document, um, that document, the Science New Golden Age document, and specifically the memo in Annex 1, gives all of the agencies 90 days after the publication of that memo, which was July 21st, gives them 90 days to integrate everything that's in that memo into their new budget proposal request that they're going to then give to OMB. And so this says September. It might be more like October this year because that'll be 90 days later. But essentially, that's when we're looking at that fiscal year 2028. That's where that number is coming from. It's aligning with this R&D budget timeline that basically takes that budget and goes from, OMB to the agencies back to, and then to, back to OMB, then to Congress, and then the president's ultimately submitting it. And then eventually that budget gets approved somewhere around July of the following year, or theoretically should. This just gives you a framework for why that document is saying fiscal year 2028. Next slide.
Yep.
So here's the specific language from the document. You don't have to read all of this now. I just have this so you can look at it and reference it later when you download these slides. But basically, yeah, within 90 days, so that's October 19th of 2026. Any agency that has 3 billion or more in fiscal year 2026 budget for the authority of research and development shall submit to basically director of OMB an action plan describing how the agency intends to implement the program implementation guidance set forth in the R&D priority practices section of the memorandum, which we're going to talk to you about today. So everything that we're talking about that's from that memorandum is important because all the agencies that have a budget of higher than 3 billion have been told within 90 days, so by October of this year, that they need to incorporate those priorities into their budget for 2028. Next slide. Okay, so good. Greg's
I think
gonna
this is mine.
kick it off. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is what the memo looks like. There's actually two different versions of the memo. One, you can go to a link directly for the memo and you'll get one that looks like this with the signatures on it. It's also part of the larger document that is the Science and New Golden Age report. I did compare them. I did a word for word comparison using Claude and discovered that they're almost exactly the same. They're not exactly the same. There's a little bit of extra language in the version that's connected to Science New Golden Age that makes it specifically about how to put these into the budgets, but it's mostly the same. And we're going to go through it here and talk about what it says. They have 9 R&D priorities, and I'm going to list them here one by one and then talk about what they are. So the first is they want to rebalance towards foundational research in the physical sciences and engineering. So this means things like understanding electrons and how they work, as opposed to trying to come up with the newest version of how to create microchips or basic research is their goal. They feel like the more applied research will belong to the private sector. They want to advance national science and technology missions, and they have a bunch of these that they've defined. There's the AI mission, a quantum mission, and fusion, space, robotics, and semiconductors. So those are the particular national science and technology missions that they've defined. Those do sound more applied to me, but I suppose that's going to be they want to do the basic part of it and still have the private sector do the uh, the more applied. They want to map AI and emerging technologies to accelerate American research and innovation. This feels like AI. AI is good. Everybody needs to use it, and so they want you to apply for it. This is not news probably to anybody, but this is a buzzword that's been around for a while. You want to say how you're using AI to support your research when you apply. R&D infrastructure. So this is interesting. There are an awful lot of facilities within the federal government and also supported by the federal government at universities, things like telescopes, particle accelerators, X-ray machines, light sources, and all of that. And they want to let more people use it. Some of those facilities I know are fully booked, so I don't know where this extra time is supposed to come from, but they do want that to be expanded. Maybe some of them really are way underutilized. And included in this is compute. So they want to give researchers access to more compute. Scientific advances into stronger regional ecosystems. So the quote from this one is, agencies should prioritize funding for manufacturing R&D across strategic technologies with the goal of building domestic manufacturing capacity and supply chains to produce the next generation of semiconductors, advanced materials, biotech, nuclear technology, and robotics. And in a broader sense, they're really thinking about regions, like how New England has all this biotech and Silicon Valley and things like that. And the next one, new funding mechanisms. So there's all kinds of things that they talk about, and it's also in the main body of the document. New ways to fund. They want it to feel less bureaucratic. They want it to be faster. They talk about using prizes a lot, and prizes have been around for quite a while. DARPA's used them a lot, where as opposed to funding you to do something, you have to find your own funding to do it. But if you do it well enough, you do it first, or so forth, you can win a prize. So that allows the federal government not to fund the research, but to direct it because people want to win the prizes. And they want more experimentation. They also, one of the interesting ideas is they want to give individual reviewers more say. So you get a review panel together, you've got 3 reviewers who've read a bunch of proposals, and the standard process is that they come up with their recommendations and they move forward with some of those. But if one reviewer really likes something, they want to give him or her the ability to make it happen. And this is supposed to go for more home runs and less after the incremental kind of work. Explore better ways to identify scientific talent. So there's a lot in here, and I think this is Brad's favorite part. I think this is positive. They want to get more kids involved in doing STEM. One of the specific things that they talk about here too is not for kids. It's more awards like the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Fellowship. So identifying people, tagging them, and funding them, so that it does feel a little bit to me like they want to do admissions as opposed to leaving that up to the universities. They get to decide who's going to be funded. Uh, this is meta science. So rigorously studying, evaluating, improving how federal science is funded. They want to look at it from the outside and map things, understand what's working and what's not working. And what's interesting about this is that on the one hand, they want to empower researchers to go and do whatever it is they want to do. They want longer grants and so forth. And then on the other hand, they want close monitoring, looking for where the holes are, make sure that those get funded. I don't know how to square those two things. This seems like more bureaucracy. If you have a specific goal in mind, this would be the way to help you get there. And the last of the 9 bullet points is integrating federal R&D into the broader science and technology enterprise. Um, they want to get more more non-federal funding involved in federal projects, more partnerships and that kind of thing. And these are the 9 bullet points that are in the memo, and this is what the various agencies are supposed to be putting into their next budget submissions. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Brad.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so in the memo in Annex 1, they outline those priorities. And then after that, they talk about actual practices to get there. And so they have 4 categories or 4 different, main practices that they want to implement. The first being develop new mechanisms to support frontier science. And then they have sub bullets for each of those 4. So I'm going to go over those 4 in the sub bullets. And then after that, we're going to show you some slides where we've drawn specific language from Science: A New Golden Age to kind of give you an idea of the language that's informing some of the practices and priorities that Greg and I are just talked about. Okay, so the first one for develop new mechanisms to support frontier science is support a diverse portfolio of institutions. And they define this by supporting more agile mid-scale science, which is science that is infrastructure heavy, multidisciplinary, basic research that requires large coordinated teams. So think 10 to 100 people. And examples they give of kind of a similar model for this is the National Science Foundation's new X labs, and also things like ARPA-E, ARPA Health, DARPA, things like that. They want to increase grant durations for transformative research. And so, coupled with that first one, which is more heavy infrastructure projects, they want to fund projects that are lasting 5 or more years. And then one of the interesting aspects of it is they want these awards to be fully funded in year 1 with all resources earmarked up front to minimize administrative burdens. So that one's kind of interesting, the idea of issuing all the funds right up front. They want to expand the use of fast grants and exploratory projects. In other words, when you're applying for a grant, in some instances, rather than requiring you to submit these huge grants, they want you to be able to submit a request, a response to an RFP that is just a few pages. They want review timelines of under a month. And then they want the award sizes to be calibrated to the proof of concept of the work, which I imagine is just the scope of the work. Ambitious design or ambitious prizes and challenges. So they want to design ambitious prizes and challenges. This is kind of interesting. So they're looking for prizes to use a 3-to-1 private to federal investment to be paired with the regulatory fast tracking, and they want to give people more access to federal testing facilities. So what exactly that means? Do they want for every 4 grants, 3 of them to be funded by private? Do they expect the cost share to be 75% or so from private? These are the kinds of models that they're thinking about. And then they want to experiment with emerging funding mechanisms. This is another one that's kind of interesting, and Greg talked about it a little bit. They want to issue these golden tickets that let individual agency technical reviewers recommend what they call unconventional proposals that may not pass consensus-driven review panels. In other words, if a review panel looks at a proposal and says, we don't think this will work, they want to have someone that's at the agency be able to say, well, I think it will, and I want to fund it. And so they can come in and provide funding, and then also at the same time encourage scientists to use two funding mechanisms, one called quadratic funding, which is essentially crowdsourcing, and another called EIGEN funding, EIGEN funding, which is essentially self-funding. Okay, next slide. Let me move over my notes here. So the next one that we have is identify and develop top technical talent. As Greg mentioned earlier, I really liked reading through this section. This is really, they're looking at how we can develop our STEM workforce. And so the first one is identify exceptional talent nationwide. Here, they're really interested in identifying top talent through standardized tests, reasoning assessments, domain competitions, think like Science Olympiad, engineering portfolios, and technical work. This instead of doing things like having people write essays or get institutional referrals, or really just looking at it even says or polish and credentials. So they're more interested in how students are doing on standardized testing than their credentials, right? So pluses and minuses here. Um, Expand advanced K through 12 STEM enrichment opportunities. So this is really, they're thinking about enrolling students in more like residential math and science programs, Olympiad style competitions. And I like this one a lot. They really want to emphasize the importance of pairing K through 12 students with expert mentors, which is near and dear to my heart. It's something that I've done a lot. Um, Expand hands-on technical learning. And so basically treat research placements in academia, industry, and federal laboratories as standard components of a high quality science and technology talent development program, and giving students more access to maker spaces. And so really what they're saying here is a degree should come with hands-on learning opportunities, either in a federal lab or with an industry partner, or even at the academic institution. We want these students to have more access to the equipment and then maker spaces where they can, make things and tinker around. Um, they want to support early career researchers. So expand the use of fellowship programs. Greg mentioned the research program, the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Program earlier. This document talks about that program a lot. They really like that program. Um, and one of the reasons they really like it is because they like the model of giving the individual the money, as the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Program does, and then they can kind of use that funding to leverage what institution they get to go to. And so now the institution is trying to get an exceptional student rather than the other way around. Um, and then support individuals agnostic of institutional affiliations. So this is, yeah, again, just looking at programs that distribute funding directly to students. Basically exactly what I was talking about. Build flexible cross-sector talent pathways. Um, so this is basically just giving scientists, engineers, and skilled technical workers more fluidity to move across academia, industry, and federal facilities. So you can see the underlying motif here is kind of the same. Hands-on learning opportunities and the ability to work across academia, federal labs, and the private industry. Finally, we have encourage broad post-fellowship services. Um, so this is the agency should consider incorporating service requirements in the fellowship programs, including academic research and training for next generation. In other words, if you get a fellowship, part of that fellowship should be you have to do some hands-on training on how to use the equipment, or even entrepreneurship, so how to work with a business or commercialize what it is you're working on. But it also gives some other opportunities as well, like work in the defense industrial base, have advisory roles that might help shape federal science and technology priorities. So maybe you have more of a policy focus. And then finally, the last one is offer opportunities for those students if they wish to have government or military service as part of their fellowship, post-fellowship experience. Next slide. So the third one is build a self-improving scientific enterprise. Greg talked a little bit about this too. Establish meta science capabilities. Um, So essentially, what this is asking for is most of the agencies already do this kind of meta-analysis of their portfolio. When I say most, I mean probably all of them. And they issue reports about what they've accomplished with their portfolio. They're really interested here in finding ways to monitor the funding mechanisms, peer review, publication practices, and how they affect the scientific outcomes. And they also want to use meta science when they're piloting these new funding mechanisms in institutional models to evaluate whether or not those are working. And they want to do that in a more sophisticated way. So part of the language here is they specifically want to hire data scientists and software engineers. So people that are really gathering lots of data, computing all that data, and spitting it out to help assess whether or not these new ideas are working. Develop systematic gap mapping capacity. Again, this is just the agencies are looking at gap analysis of what they're doing and if it's working and if it's not, and using those gap maps to identify unmet needs, duplicative efforts, and emerging opportunities. Again, this to me is just more of what's already going on. Build data infrastructure for meta science. And so this is developing purpose-built data infrastructure for the meta science that we're talking about right now. So this is integrating application level data, reviewer behavior scoring, and looking at links between the awards and then the downstream outcomes. Again, this one calls out specifically these jobs would be to be filled by software engineers and data scientists. This was an interesting one. Elevate and empower agency program officers, and I'm going to show you the quote directly from the document in a little bit. But basically, what this document says, what Science: A New Golden Age states, is that they want the role of program officer to be one of the most sought after roles that any STEM professional could ever want. They're really emphasizing the importance of having program managers at these agencies. And they want to recruit top scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists to time limited public service. They want to raise the prestige of that position. They want to offer more competitive compensation for those roles in order to make sure that they have the top scientific talent in there. And then reduce administrative burdens. Greg mentioned this earlier. So having these meta science analysis and program officers is not meant to add more bureaucracy, but there is some kind of interesting give and take there, right? But they really want to reduce administrative burdens, so they want to carefully weigh any incremental gains and oversight from the new requirements or regulations that they're proposing against the cumulative burden that they impose on researchers. And then they also want options for easing administrative and regulatory burdens on federal technology transfer to increase private sector investment. In other words, they want to make it easier for you to take stuff from the lab out into the market. Okay, next slide. Our last one, number 4. This is integrate federal research and development into broader science and technology enterprise. So they want to drive greater integration of foundational and applied research. And so really what they're looking for here are funding consortia and partnerships that integrate basic research and manufacturing research and development. And so they want long-term research agendas between industry and academia and philanthropists, all these things together, while treating the publication of foundational discoveries as public goods. In other words, they're going to want you to apply for more research grants that tie in industry. If you get publications out of it, great, those are public goods. And if there's any innovations that come out of it, they want to be very proactive about licensing those specific process innovations to private industry, and co-locating any manufacturing that comes out of that with either federal facilities, private facilities, and test beds. They want to expand the use of non-federal cost share. So your funding opportunities are going to come out. They should leverage existing resources, prioritize support for initiatives that incorporate meaningful non-governmental cost share. So expect a little bit more of your grants to require you to have cost share with an industry partner, with philanthropy. You think of all the big philanthropy companies out there, like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, things like that. State and local governments or international partners. Uh, Integrate federal research and development with non-research and development investments to support regional ecosystems. And so here we're looking at coordinating R&D investments of the federal government with the non-R&D investments that the federal government is making. So in other words, they have this money that goes towards your research and development, but they have other money that's going toward other programs that maybe aren't necessarily, they might be related to economic development or something like that. They want to make sure that those two things are married to ensure that workforce and education and economic development infrastructure, all of those things are kind of coordinated and working together across the government. And finally, they want to integrate industry and workforce training. And so they want the government agencies to partner more with industry to attract stronger applicants and amplify federal investments through industry co-funding. So they specifically pull out industry might help with tuition or stipends or portable research funding, paid internship placement, access to research infrastructure, curriculum development, expert mentorship, right? So when these new RFPs are coming out, expect them to be asking you to do more work with industry partners. Okay, Greg, you want to go to the next slide? Okay, so then Greg and I went through and we pulled out some little snippets from the document, little quotes that we thought were, particularly interesting, um, in terms of what can you expect at your research institution. Maybe we can popcorn these or go back and forth, or I can whatever. You also, anyone in the chat, you're free to like post in the chat how you feel, what the vibes are. But the first thing is expect less support for international students. In section 1.9, it says basically the United States' reliance on foreign student talent sidelines American students. And they're very like standing in opposition to the idea of having, foreign students coming into US based labs and contributing to the research infrastructure there, research portfolio there, when there could be more American students integrated into these facilities.
Yeah, that seems very consistent with the general rhetoric that we get from this administration. And again, along those same theme, we've got DEI is a theme that does come up in the document, and how they don't like it. They noted that DEI had become a very large part of the proposals being funded, and now they're much less.
Yeah, the language they use here, they specifically call it a sweeping distortion of the selection process that reduces mobility for the best researchers. And so, what we might traditionally think of as or the language that we use, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a lot of our grants or were asked to in the previous administration, is not going to be a requirement of the RFPs coming up. I don't think this is new news to anybody. Um, and then there's also some specific language that they put in this document specifically that compares DEIA to historical use of words like the Jewish problem and things like that. So this is maybe one of the more controversial sections of the document, but the take home is you shouldn't use the words diversity, equity, and inclusion anymore. Um, but you should think about broadly how to incorporate more people from your community into what you're doing, because it does have language specifically around that. Um, and so in a lot of ways, the concept of diversity, equity, inclusion is still very much alive. Just don't use that specific language. Next one. Um, yeah, so expect expansion of just-in-time and fast-track grants. And so Greg actually pointed this out to me first, and maybe he could talk a little bit about it. But this document talks about some of the historical examples of the way that the United States has really pushed research forward. And it talks about the Manhattan Project. It talks about the NASA and the Apollo program. It talks about finding vaccines for penicillin, but it doesn't mention Operation Warp Speed, which happened under the first Trump administration and was this fantastic story of biotech development in a year to develop a vaccine for an emerging virus that came out. And in this particular section, they're actually quoting this use of these kind of applications that take 30 minutes and can funding decisions were made effectively within 48 hours in order to develop vaccines and diagnostic treatments for COVID-19. And so they want to continue to use that model for things that are of high importance, right? So can we turn over grants faster to anything that we declare like an emergency or of high importance?
Yeah, one of the interesting things in this reference that they cited is that they say they didn't seek perfection or fairness. I don't know about seeking perfection, but fairness is a big issue for the federal government. If you're a private institution and you say we're going to accept grant proposals until noon, and then at 10:30 you get something you think this is absolutely fantastic and you give all the money away, and anybody who submits after that too late, you know, maybe that's not fair, but they can do it because they're trying to act fast. If the federal government doesn't focus on fairness, they wind up in court. So I'm not sure that this is going to work as well as they say, but because fairness is so central to the way so much of the federal government operates, that they have to be transparent and fair in what they're doing. Should we go to the next one, Brad?
I think so. Yeah, so this gets in to what I was talking about earlier. So basically, expect continued bureaucracy and oversight from program managers and program evaluation. However, the program evaluation is now going to happen from these meta science units. And so basically, they want every federal agency, federal science agency, to have a meta science unit that's highly empowered and reporting directly to the director or administrator. And so basically, you're just collecting all the data and metadata from what you said you were going to do in your proposal, what the progress is, and whether or not you're making progress toward the end goal, and then use that data to determine whether or not they should keep doing the RFP or posting the RFP using the same language, or maybe they need to make tweaks and adjustments. What that means for you is you're still going to have to report on the progress that you're making, and they're still going to take that data and they're still going to take that data to determine the funding decisions and what their program looks like moving forward. Um, they also want to make program management one of the most sought after jobs in science, as I mentioned. So expect those program managers to be there, authoritative, and you're still going to have to please them. You're still going to have to talk to program managers, just like always. Um, Maybe they'll get paid a little bit better. Good for them. I hope that's an outcome. Um, and then finally, what was the last one I had? Yeah, give each meta science unit a budget. It can a budget so that it can re-grant to program managers uh, for participating in experience. Other words, um, if there's a particular program that a meta science team finds is going really well, they can actually allocate a budget for the program managers to say, we want to keep that project going.
All right.
Uh, yeah, this language I found really interesting. They want to, so expect less regulations around science and technology development. Um, again, as we are talking about, there's some places where we think there might be more administrative burden. They're trying to get rid of other administrative burdens. So how it comes out in the end, maybe it all comes out equal. But this language in particular was interesting. They talk about a permissionless approach to innovation, but then they have a bunch of caveats. Well, what do we mean by that? Um, but basically, where existing rules do not fit new technologies, regulatory sandbox, they want regulatory sandboxes that allow real world testing under controlled conditions. Again, to me, that sounds a lot like science as we know it. So it implies that they're thinking about other ways to proceed with science in control conditions that might not necessarily be the same as what we have now. What exactly that means, I'm not 100% sure. Um, but there definitely are implying that there's going to be less regulations around the development of new science and technology.
Yeah, and one of their examples was about how much regulation there is for nuclear power plants, and they say, "Oh, it's too much, and it should go away." So yeah, I'm not sure that's all good. They didn't talk about what the advantages are of regulating nuclear power plants, which are probably apparent if you go to certain places in Ukraine or Japan.
Um, Expect more integrated training and apprenticeship opportunities. And so, what was interesting to me as I was reading through this, a lot of the language is very similar to the National Science Foundation's ATE RFP that they have out right now, which is Advanced Technical Education. And so they actually pulled a lot of language from different National Science Foundation things that are going on in this document. But they really want to leverage smaller institutions in community colleges. So it even says we must rebuild integrated communities from community colleges, where community colleges can become regional hubs for scientific innovation and technological innovation, integrating with critical industries, national science foundations, regional innovation engines, and local ecosystem initiatives. And so they really want to find ways to leverage smaller institutions and community colleges to bring in students that become skilled or become trained in the skilled technical workforce to go out into industry after they get their associate's degrees or their bachelor's degrees, and rather than continuing in academia, they want to see them kind of using their hands to do more manufacturing here in the United States and leveraging some of the things offered by these regional innovation engines or federal labs or private industry labs. And then
Last one
finally,
of these charts.
yeah, yeah. Finally, this is the last one. So, chapter 5 is all about AI. Um, and Greg talked about this in the priorities too. Um, Expect artificial intelligence to play a pivotal role in most or all of future research. I would definitely say most. All probably is too much, but they really are like this chapter specifically talks about reforms of the scientific enterprise that allow us to reach beyond the limits of human cognition and organization. And so it does talk about, for example, the next sentence is our brains today impose hard boundaries. And so if you're putting in a proposal and you're limiting it to only the cognition of the people that are on the project, it might not be seemed as competitive compared to something that is leveraging the intelligence, that's being produced by a data center. AI-driven planning combined with industrial scale autonomous laboratories will let us parallelize data collection with custom techniques tailored to each run. Essentially, what they're talking about here is they really want to see projects, as I think, Greg and I talked about this, most science works as a kind of iterative process where you're collecting data and innovating and coming up with new techniques at the same time. Like that's what science is. And they really want to see people using AI to maybe analyze that data on a faster time scale so that you can do quickly more iterative stuff so that you can not do iterative science, but do these kind of expansive, like world changing scientific experiments that they're looking for.
Okay. Here are links for all the documents. I think this chart's most important because you guys will all get access to these. Is there anything you wanted to say on this one?
Um, yeah, there's just why we're giving you these supporting documents. So, Sciency in this Frontier was the science document that came out that's was in a similar light to Science: A New Golden Age. So, Science: The Endless Frontier is a famous document that was published by Vannevar Bush in 1945 after World War II that basically established the National Science Foundation and what the science research enterprise looks like in the United States up until today. And what we're talking about, Science: A New Golden Age, is being framed as the update to that 80-year-old document. And so we have links. Both of the documents are free. You can read both of them online. Then you have the direct link to the R&D memo that we took a lot of this lecture from. And then if you want to, there is a reference to gold standard science. You can look at the executive order there. Gold standard science is essentially just science as we know it. It just says things like don't plagiarize. It's like, well, okay, we get it. And then you can also look at all of the executive orders since 2025 related to science and technology and research development at this link that we've provided, just in case you're interested in looking at all of the executive orders that tie into this S&T ecosystem. The next one has then just some articles that are out there. Um, Two by the Federation of American Scientists, one that was an editorial published in Nature, and another that was an editorial published in EdTech magazine. Just thinking about, how this document might impact the science and technology in the United States, and how it might impact specifically higher education in general. Again, these are just editorials and opinions that are published, that are out there. Greg and I would highly recommend that you read them just to get an idea of what some other perspectives on this document are that are out there as you're reading through it and kind of trying to make sense of what it all means.
And this is our final chart. So there are QR codes up here that will allow you to go to the Heroes webpage, see future events, and then please fill out the webinar feedback form as well and let us know what you think. But now I want to stop talk. Oh, and feel free to use our email addresses. Write to us. We'd love to hear
Absolutely.
directly from you. Okay, so are there any questions, things that we should talk about? And I believe, Christine, that we can have people come off mute if they raise their hand, right?
Absolutely. So you may raise your hand to come off mute and interact directly with our panelists, but you can also use the chat or the Q&A tool, whichever suits you. And we'll give you a few minutes to come up with your questions and promote some discussion here. Not a few minutes, but a few seconds. And I have one I want us to lead off. So does long-term investment in individual researchers ultimately amount to less overall funding across institutions? Is it a deprioritization of funding that goes to institutions and can be held, that where the institution has some control over the money?
Yeah, I do think it feels like they want to give the individual researchers more control and the institutions less. So you could be a postdoc or you could be a professor, a postdoc, or a grad student. You can win an award. You can actually even be outside of academia, I think, is some of what they may be thinking. And the federal government's going to give you a bunch of money to do research, and you can spend it over the next several years. You can switch institutions and take it with you. And if the budget stayed flat, that would mean less money going into awards for specific research projects at institutions. Given that the budgets, I mean, they're proposing that the budgets go down, so that means even less to institutions. Yeah.
Yeah, from the language of the document, it seemed really clear that um, the idea is to switch the framework of how it is an individual ends up in a research institution. So rather than a bunch of people desiring to go to a research institution because it's top tier, they want to have the research institutions going after the scientists because they're top tier. And a way that they're proposing to do that is by enabling those individual scientists to have the funding that they get to take to whatever research institution is the most appealing to them, is able to sell themselves the best to that particular scientist.
So I'm looking at the chat. I see that Archana Sharma posted a comment. She's developing a grant proposal currently, and this session was extremely useful. If you don't mind, Archana, I would love to know what it is that you're going to change about your proposal based on what we talked or what you're thinking about anyway. I mean, it's too soon to say what you've changed, but yeah, what did we say that was helpful? You can put it in the chat or you can raise your hand and Christine will let you speak.
Yeah, I would love to know too at our next meeting when we're working on our grant proposal together. So she was also from the ATE workshop.
Right, I remember that. But
Yeah.
oh, so you still are working together?
Hmm.
Okay.
And we're thrilled that we have repeat customers here.
Recidivists?
Um,
Oh, so
Dr.
Arcana, what you do is raise your hand and then Christine can recognize you and let you speak. I can't walk you. There we go.
Hi, yeah, no, I think it's like, a lot of the language that you were talking about, because a lot of mission that statements that you all shared today, I think aligning my proposal with some of that language would be really helpful. And to understand the mission, the forthcoming mission is really helpful as well, because it helps me fine tune some of the outcomes and products that we are thinking about for the grant, to align with it's like, what's coming next. So this was very helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, folks, in the absence of further questions and comments, I want to say thank you for attending this webinar today. I learned a lot. As Greg mentioned, there are QR codes on this slide. Our QM events page has upcoming webinars that you might want to register for. On our Heroes webpage, you can connect with all of our Heroes Fellows. And our workshop feedback form is extremely important to us, so we know what we can do better next time or content areas that you'd like to focus on. I want to thank everyone for coming today. This is a very informative webinar, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I look forward to reading your emails. Please send them. I know it's a lot to digest. Please send them. I would love to talk to you about it.
Ditto.